Colson Whitehead. Welcome. Thanks for having us, I should say, because we're here in your agent's apartment.
Yes, Chelsea, New York.
Chelsea, New York, the city you were born and raised in. Our viewers just saw a summary of your career path and numerous accolades, and it made me wonder, how long does it take to internalize that fact? Like, I'm a best-selling author, 2-time Pulitzer Prize winner, American storyteller.
I try not to think about it, you know.
You should.
No, I appreciate it. You know, I've been writing for 25 years, and I've had ups and downs. I think my big takeaway from the last couple of years is that sometimes it goes well, and you write a book, and people understand it and get it, and then also sometimes you don't. And either way, you're just faced with the blank page the next time. It doesn't get any easier, doesn't get any harder. So might as well just concentrate on the work and enjoy it when it's going well.
But are you enjoying that it's going well? Maybe that's a better question.
I do. I bought a nice shirt. You know, I can afford a nice shirt.
Yeah, I can see that, yeah.
I travel more, with the last couple of books. I have a lot more publishers around the world, and I get to go to Norway. Never been to Norway. Never been to Sweden. I started going to Amsterdam a bunch for publications there. So, and I appreciate the fact that, it's kind of worked out. So,
yeah, including the nice shirt. The backbone of this interview is a handful of clips of movies, documentaries, TV series that you have picked per our request, and we'll be discussing images that are significant to you in one way or another. You were a TV critic, right, for a couple of years before you became an acclaimed writer. You must have watched a lot of TV. Did you OD on it at some point, or you still love watching TV?
Well, it's very different. It was like 30 years ago, and at that point, TV criticism was the most disrespected part of the arts section. Like, no one, if you were a TV critic, you were a loser and couldn't get a real job.
It was looked down on.
Yes, and so I was incredibly excited. I was working for the Village Voice, alternative leftist weekly, and I dreamed of working there. And there's so many critics I looked up to who would write about TV one week and then books the next and film, these sort of multitasking, brainy types. So I was very excited, and as a kid, I was a shut-in. I was always watching TV, and so putting together my trove of TV knowledge was a blessing. So I was very excited.
Oh, so you were happy that your childhood hobby paid the bills, basically?
Yes, all that sitting around, not playing baseball and being indoors, I found a nice outlet for it.
It paid off.
and just writing.
But do you still enjoy watching TV now?
I do. I mean, now like back then there was one fall season and you ran out of stuff to say come winter and spring and summer, and now it's much different. You have things are debuting all the time, and there's much more great stuff out there. And so I feel very fortunate that people are making great work. Also, I feel lucky I don't have to think about it. I don't have to explain why The Sopranos is interesting, why Succession is cool. I can just enjoy it as a consumer.
Yeah, and it's in a lot of people's DNA right now, series like that. Yeah, so those are things you like watching, Sopranos, what else?
Oh, cooking shows. I don't like a lot of stuff, but any kind of reality cooking show.
Cooking show?
It could be two people like dueling with breadsticks. I'll watch it. Yeah, the highbrow TV and also the low reality shows.
What do you consider highbrow TV?
Well written, great acting, something that couldn't exist, 20 years ago. I think, the late 90s, we start getting, networks are getting more confident in what they're going to put on, and so you allow people like David Chase or the people behind The Wire to take risks, and maybe no one's watching. And maybe the Emmys always overlook them, but there's so much freedom. And compare that to when I was writing in the early '90s, being a TV critic. It's just a great bounty out there.
Yeah, there was way more crap on TV back then, maybe.
Yeah, I had to review a lot of sitcoms. My big debut as a writer was a a think piece about the series finales of the show's Growing Pains and Who's the Boss.
Oh.
I'm not sure if they made it over there.
No, yeah.
Tony Danza.
Definitely, Tony Danza. He
yes.
was the household. He worked in her household. She was like a lawyer.
It's a manservant or something.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of a weird setup. But I was really glad, it was my big break into writing. And once, the great thing about working at that newspaper at that time was once you were in the building, you could nag people for work. And so I wrote my TV piece, and then I could go to the music section and the film section, and
yeah.
soon I was sort of confident enough to work on my own stuff.
Wiggle your way in there.
Yeah.
Like I said, you were born and raised here in New York, and you'd like to start this program in your hometown with a clip from the real-life snapshot movie Downtown 81. 81 referring to the year it takes place. Where are you taking us?
We're going to the Upper East Side, Lower East Side. It's New York City is coming out of bankruptcy and a time of incredible crime and degradation. All those shots you've seen in movies of the graffiti-covered subway cars, that's the late 70s, early 80s. And it's a difficult time to be living in the city. There's a lot of people moving out to the suburbs, a lot of people rethinking why they're here. And then there are people like Jean-Michel Basquiat, Glenn Kenny, the writer and director of this film, who are finding inspiration in that chaos.
Let's have a look. Downtown 81. Well, you're in the 80s when you only need $500 to pay back rent in Manhattan.
Sure. And also, the Lower East Side looks like that. And it's hard to believe that when you walk by all those condos now on Avenue B and C, it really was this bombed-out neighborhood.
Yeah, he calls it a war zone.
And that's the end of 20 years of bad city policy. It's the end of the waves of arson and white flight and neglect of social services, and that's the sort of result.
Because why did you choose this particular scene?
I think writing during lockdown. I did a lot of walking around. Actually, that's actually part of my process is walking around with my little notebook, thinking up semi-pretentious thoughts as I walk through the city. But I'm writing about New York now and imagining myself in the 1970s, sort of around this time. And
because you were born in '69 and you grew up in the Upper East Side, right?
all over. So I lived on the Upper East Side, a few blocks from the Guggenheim, which we just saw. And that block, that's the Round Museum that we just saw in the first city scene. And that looks exactly the same. If you walk by there now, Central Park is right there. And then, of course, that bombed out Lower East Side is completely different. So much of the city does remain fixed in place.
But you said you moved around, but you always stayed on the island.
Yes, until I got out of college and had to go to Brooklyn, as everyone did at that time.
But him saying it looked like a war zone, that is not hyperbolic. It was really that bad.
No, and that's my first New York, is that sort of bombed out New York. It's dirty, for one thing, and I'm always superimposing that dirty city over the nice city that we have now. It's my first impression, and it's sticking with me.
But what's it like for a kid growing up in a warlike landscape?
Well, the whole city is not like the Lower East Side. But you learn, if you stayed in New York at that time, you learn how to, take care of yourself. You're aware of your surroundings. Nowadays, take a taxi across the park, and there are people jogging in Central Park at midnight, and it's like, what are you doing? It's so crazy. It's actually been safe for a long time, but that ingrained sense of.
But was it that dangerous for you back then as well?
Oh, I mean, you learn how to carry yourself. So it's not like I fought my way to school.
No,
but
it's not that you were mugged on your way to school on a daily basis.
But the city got sort of crazier and crazier with the rise of the crack trade and the closing down of a lot of mental institutions without any plan for how to take care of the people we're putting out in the street. And so that sort of slide, that degradation of the city continues until the early 90s, and then, sort of famously, Mayor Giuliani cleans things up. Yeah. Or just moves everything out to the margins.
And prices went up. You kind of grew up in a privileged way, right? You went to private school, a good neighborhood, but yet in this exact year, 81, you and your parents moved downtown?
Yeah, we were on 97th and 5th by the Guggenheim. But, I had a lot of siblings, and, my sister would go to college and move to a smaller place. My family's business is doing better, moved to a bigger place. So we were always expanding and
moving.
Contracting.
But when did you first start exploring New York?
In high school, that's when you start leaving the nest. And so we were on 101st and West End, which was, the neighborhood wasn't particularly great. Crack, as I was saying, was becoming a force and was not particularly safe. But it's also when, in high school, we start doing that identity formation stuff. So I found the one kid in high school who liked Sonic Youth and the birthday party, and we started going foraging and in the village.
To clubbing, you mean?
Clubbing and going to CBGB's and Irving Plaza. CBGB's.
CBGB's?
It's a rock club downtown, made famous by the Ramones, and Talking Heads is where they first played, and a lot of people would say that's the birthplace of punk. I was obviously 6 years old when that was happening, but in the late 80s...
I was counting in my head, wait a minute.
In the late 80s, it was still a place to play, and so...
So do you also kind of idolize this period then? Is it also like a nostalgic feeling of an old New York that's...
I hope to write about it one time. I was too young to hang out in 1981 in these places in this movie. I have an older sister, and I hear her play these great records and put my ear up to the door and listen. And if you can swing it, have a cool older sister or older brother who brings the cool music and film into your house. And so that was my education.
Yeah. But what we also see in this movie that it's also a good a breeding ground for creativity, right? You've also you mentioned the music and the clubs. So how come bleak situations like these are often also a fertile ground for creativity, for art?
Rent is cheaper, so artists can find their space.
That is so true.
The city is broke. You're forced to survive, and it's also I think inspiring. 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, when we went into lockdown, I was stuck in my apartment, so I was writing all the time. But in writing about the city, I'd have to go out and just walk for hours up and down Harlem, and I haven't lived in Harlem since I was a little kid. And so finding locations for the book, I would just sort of zigzag all these different streets I'd never been down before.
For your latest book, Harlem Shuffle. Yeah.
Edgecombe Avenue. We know about 125th Street and Broadway, but I never really walked down Edgecombe. What's up with that? What's up with Convent? And finding locations. And you couldn't go in the stores because everything was closed down. And so I'm just walking with my mask. And I got great material. I mean, I'm like, Basquiat in this movie, just as I said, just sort of walking around, taking notes. And it's my hometown. It's suffered a wound, but I'm also invigorated. I want to contribute and
a bleak situation like that, the lockdown, but also in this case, the war zone-like surroundings, they can also be an inspiration.
Yes.
There's obviously also the pandemic reference in the beginning, right? Him laying in that hospital bed and the doctor saying...
It's always coming around. I mean, I think there have been various outbreaks of yellow fever and cholera over the years. New York is always being sort of laid low by...
Although in the movie it's not completely clear why he's in the hospital in the first place.
No, it's a mysterious ailment. But the recovery is always there.
Yeah. Oh, that's a nice one. Yeah. That's also what you see in the movie. But what did you? Because for me, the whole lockdown and the pandemic, and you talking about getting inspiration, in general, it was pretty boring, right? Was it? Did you?
Mostly, existence is pretty boring. So this is very familiar. I work out of my house. I'm a writer. I'm not like a cafe writer where I'm like, I must go out and I'm with people drinking coffee.
You like boring?
It's if you're bored, you have nothing to do except find a way to amuse yourself, and I amuse myself by writing stories. But
speaking of a pandemic, let's go to a world in which a virus turns people into flesh-eating zombies.
As it does. Yeah.
You picked a scene from the classic 1978 zombie horror film Dawn of the Dead. We see Peter, Francine, and Steven stuck in a shopping mall surrounded by zombies. Anything else we need to know before we start watching?
No, I think it's self-explanatory. I mean, the world is ending, and they found a safe harbor in this mall. They've locked the doors to keep the zombies out, and now they have this whole consumer world to themselves.
Dawn of the Dead.
There you have it. There you have it.
There we have what? Well, you picked this.
Yes. When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. I came, as I mentioned, as a bit of a shut-in, and nothing I liked more than watching horror movies on the mid-afternoon movie. And a lot of the stuff I watched was not necessarily appropriate for a young lad. This movie came out in '78, and I saw it around that time. It was rated X for excessive gore. But, for a family outing, mom, dad, my brother and I went out and saw it.
Really?
And,
no censorship whatsoever for young
I'm not sure what it
Colson.
was like, in your country. But the '70s was a different time in terms of parenting and what was permitted. It was a time of TV dinners, a lot of time of unattended childhood pastimes. So,
But this was not unattended. They took you to see it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they didn't mind you. I mean, did you dream of it? I mean, you were, what, 10 back then?
Well, this is the second in the original Dead trilogy, as you all know. The first being Night of the Living Dead. And that movie stuck with me because it had a black protagonist, and I hadn't seen a lot of black heroes in movies. And if you don't know, the premise is that, it's the first day of the zombie apocalypse, the world is going to hell, and a black man is being pursued by white people who want to tear him limb from limb, which even when I was a kid sort of struck me as a metaphor for America. It stayed with me. And I think it became part of my psychological makeup. After I saw Dawn of the Dead, I started having zombie dreams like once a month for decades.
Ouch.
And sometimes, I escape and it's a positive dream. Sometimes I get caught. Sometimes they're fast. Sometimes they're slow.
So sometimes you're eaten alive.
Yes. Sometimes they talk. Depending on my sort of psychological weather, that would sort of determine the zombies. And then eventually I ended up writing a zombie book
Yeah.
to cure myself.
Zone 1. But I want to talk a bit more about the clip first before we dive into your own zombies story and into the book Zone 1. Because Peter says in this specific clip, he says that the zombies are not, they're not right after the fresh meat, right? He says they're after the place. They don't know why, they just remember. They remember that they want to be in here.
Even when the trappings of civilization have been ripped away, there is this love of consumer pleasure. They have nothing left except this memory that they used to have fun at the mall. They used to have fun shopping. They used to go ice skating in the rink. And as they say, in this clip, it was an important place in their lives. So even if they have nothing else, even if they're dead inside,
They remember that. Yeah, they want to.
And it gives them comfort.
But what does it say about humankind that they go back to a mall?
It's the one safe place that they can find. It contains the whole world, as you can see. It has finance, it has food, it has recreation, and nice fur coats. So it is 1970s America contained in one building. And the characters are looking down upon these horrible creatures outside, but they're just as implicated in the consumer scheme. Given free reign, they're filling their pockets with money. They're getting their nice fur coats and nice dresses, so they're not too far removed. And I think that stayed with me.
But we see that zombies, they go back to a place that's meaningful to them, right? They can't really think anymore, but they do go to back to that place. Where do you think you end up when you become a zombie?
Oh, I just be on going back to TV. I'll sit on my couch with a clicker that doesn't work, trying to wonder why.
That's where you're
nothing's
going?
working on. Yeah, I think so. I spent a lot of time there. My couch and my sitting place.
Yeah. And so we mentioned your own book, Zone 1. It was published 10 years ago, long before COVID, long after Dawn of the Dead. A zombie novel. I obviously I read it, and you are a literary novelist, right? So clearly the book is not just about zombies. I felt it was maybe more of like a metaphor for climate change, like a wave that's coming at us, a wave of water and people. In the case of climate change, that is this. I mean, in the book it's zombies, but maybe that's my green hippie disposition, right? I don't know. What's your apocalyptic fear?
Well, I mean, I think the terror of the zombie stayed with me because at any moment, I think I keyed into, and it's really about my own psychological flaws, but a zombie is a person who sort of stopped pretending to be human. I think the apocalypse comes, and your family, your friends, the people down the street have been revealed to be the monsters they've always been. They just stopped pretense. And so it's a terror of other people. It's a terror of civilization falling away and revealing us to who we are. Doesn't speak well of my orientation psychologically to the world or to people, but there you have it.
Yeah. Is it a misanthropic view on the world?
It's not really generous. But also in the apocalypse narrative, or a lot of them, there is this hope that you can find that place where the other people like you, the humans, are. If there's no narrative, if you can't find that safe mall, if you can't find that refuge in the hills where you can restart society. So encoded in that apocalyptic, misanthropic vision is that hope that you can find your people, you can find a safe place in the ruins.
Yeah, and then that there is still hope. Although most zombie movies, there is not.
They're downbeat, which appealed to me when I was younger. Now I'm like, if I'm on the run, I guess I got my kids. I got to carry my little boy.
Yeah.
So I no longer. I mean, definitely writing a book about the apocalypse has diminished my appetite for the apocalypse. I think I definitely did sort of.
Wait, so before you had an appetite for apocalypse?
I felt a kinship with.
Really?
Disaster. I mean, I think a lot of people do. I think that's why these narratives are popular.
But in what way? Like thinking about it, thinking what would I do, where would I go, or also, in a way, looking forward to it?
Giving a place for your fears to play out in a safe place. I was drawing upon, with Zone 1, I was drawing upon zombie films, but also late 60s, early 70s, apocalyptic, sci-fi movies, Planet of the Apes, Omega Man, movies where the bomb is dropped and then you have to rebuild. And how do you find your people?
Starting from scratch.
Yeah. So I think, people are living under the shadow of the Cold War, and we start having these nuclear war movies that open with the bombs dropping, and then the survivor opens the hatch. What do we do now? We're living with these fears. How can we find a place, and it's in art, it's in film, it's in stories, to interact with them in a safe way.
Did writing Zone 1 help you to deal with the zombie nightmares?
They went away. I've only had like 4, since in the last 10 years. And it's actually a relief, because I wake up like, whew, haven't had one of those in a long time.
Yeah. So it did help.
Usually when I write about something, I'm so sick of it.
And also subconsciously, apparently.
So I did my psychological interaction with zombie stories with that book. With my poker book, I was a big poker fan, and I wrote a book about going to the World Series of Poker.
Yeah, it's more biography, right? It's more autobiography.
It's a nonfiction account, memoir-ish, about a middle-aged loser who goes to the World Series of Poker. So it's very autobiographical. And then since then, my love for poker has really diminished. So
really, because I heard that you still love to crush people in poker games.
Oh no,
maybe more in a private setting.
Not as much as I used to. Yeah. I think I spend so much time with a subject, and I do actually lose a lot of enthusiasm for it, unfortunately.
What are your nightmares about now, if it's not zombies?
Oh. I don't know how to pay my bills, How do I afford these nice shirts? I don't know. I haven't remembered any nightmares for a while.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. How about we move on to David Bowie?
Sounds good.
He's being interviewed by British broadcaster Jeremy Paxman. I have absolutely no idea of who I am, but I'm extremely happy. Is that a New York state of mind?
Well, I think it's good not to think your process too much. I mean, I think there's so many different things I like about that clip, which you guys dug up.
Yeah. But let's start with David Bowie first.
Well, I think I try to mix it up, from book to book, and so I have a coming-of-age novel, a zombie novel, a nonfiction book about poker, and I'm definitely done with a subject when I've written the book and want to move on.
Yeah.
And I think I internalized that from artists like David Bowie and Stanley Kubrick. Stanley Kubrick will do his war movie, his science fiction movie.
So what he says the attention span, easily bored, that sounded familiar to you.
Well, it takes 2 years to write a book, so I'm not, I do have an attention span to write a book, but I'm definitely done with something once I've explored it. And I think with David Bowie, again, going back to my sister playing his records, he has this persona for this record and the next one for another record. And if you know how to do something, why do it again?
So you discovered his music also thanks to your sister?
Yes. I remember in 7th grade, a friend made me a mixtape of like Motley Crue and Cheap Trick, these American heavy metal bands. And my sister busted in and was like, what is this crap? And brought me London Calling by The Clash, Gang of Four's album, Songs of the Free, and David Bowie Best Of. And in that, 10 hits, he moves to a lot of different styles. The harder Ziggy Stardust stuff, his mid-70s soul, Young Americans period. Mm-hmm. And it seemed like if you're an artist, keep mixing it up. Why do the same thing over and over again? So I think I internalized that early.
Yeah.
And then I think...
But in the acknowledgement at the end of the Underground Railroad, you even write David Bowie is in every book. I mean, you thank him, you thank Prince, Sonic Youth.
Well, I think all my influences are there.
But can I, as a reader, also find David Bowie in your books?
No. It's more like he's in the room and Public Enemy's in the room and Edith Piaf. I play a lot of music when I write.
So literally when you're writing, his music is on?
Yes. So, in the age of iTunes, I have like a 3,000 song playlist. And it does go from David Bowie to...
Edith Piaf.
Edith Piaf. Oh. The same way I'm drawing influences from TV I watched as a kid. It's music. And film, and of course various authors. It all goes into the mix, and New York too. I mean, I think everything, all that stuff that makes you as a person, you're drawing from different things, and that's what you make your personality out of. And if you make art, that's what you make your art out of.
Yeah. And as you said, the not the short attention span maybe, but the constant reinvention that Paxman refers to and asks David Bowie. You already answered that question in a sense, but most people in general are pretty scared of change, right? We tend to be more of the cobbler, stick to your trade. Does that make sense?
I know what you're saying. I'm not sure what the equivalent expression is, but
how do you deal with that? How do you?
The challenge is fun. What can I take from the coming of age novel genre that I like? What do I want to throw out? What do I take from historical novels? How other people have done it? How I want to do it? So I've never written a horror novel before. It's scary, and that's what makes the word vital. That's what makes the word vital. If you know how to do it, it's not very much fun, is it? So
there's no challenge for you then.
Well, I'm now actually writing a sequel to Harlem Shuffle, so I'm following the same character in 2 books, which is new for me. But then that becomes a way of challenging myself. How can I take this one character and the situation and then find more stuff there, find new worlds in it.
Yeah. But it's not, maybe I'm sounding like your publisher right now, but that's not after a huge success like the Underground Railroad that it's tempting to write something similar.
No, I mean, all I can do is what I've always done, and is like find something that's compelling and interesting to me at the time when I have to figure out what's next. And I think all my books are good. It's not like I write a book, and I'm like, publish this crap, this piece of crap. And so I don't know why.
No, but I mean, for some people, it's hard, once you have success with one thing, and then to shove that aside and think, no, and now I'm going to do something completely new. I admire you for that, but I don't think that's in all of us. That's for all of us. That's a specific,
well, I think
characteristic you have.
Spending 2 years writing a book that other people think you should be doing seems like a really dreary and depressing thing. And life is pretty short, and so even if I am a so-called literary novelist, I could write a zombie novel. I'm not going to get kicked out of the union.
You can write anything you want. I mean, what's next? Colson Whitehead young adult vampire fiction? Colson Whitehead cookbook?
I think a romance, set on the eve of the Russian Revolution or something. That'd be a nice way to mix it up. Who knows? But the idea...
Colson Whitehead crossword puzzle.
The idea is that if you do it once, why do it again? And I think, looking at that Bowie clip, he talks about doing it one way for a while and then stopping. He gets more comfortable in himself. He doesn't need the gimmick of the persona. And that's why it's sort of like this interview, because he's very serious. I wanted to write musicals, didn't work out. And then the interviewer mispronounces his name and just like starts cracking up. And he's like, the interview changes. And you see that different part of him. And I write books that are very serious and talk about serious issues. Then I write books with a lot of jokes in them, and they both address different parts of the world. The world is tragic sometimes, and also absurd and comic. And all of us, I think, over the course of a day are veering towards tragedy. Then an hour later, your day changes, and you find something beautiful in your humdrum existence. And that's life. And so if I can access the part of me that's super serious about my art, and also the part of me that's playful, it's a good day of work.
Yeah. What did you personally like so much about that protagonist, main character, Carney, that you feel like, what, I'm going to do another book?
Well, I think the two previous books, one was about American slavery, one was about Jim Crow, the system of oppression after slavery that kept Black people in our place. And those characters are really determined by those social structures. And Carney, he's a criminal, he's a crook, also a family man, living different worlds. He gets to win. He gets to pull off this caper or this heist.
Yeah.
And in a way that the people in the last two books could not. And so it's liberating to get into a place where I can make weird jokes. There's a capacity for humor in his world that didn't exist in the previous two books. He gets to escape these different forces that are constraining his life. And so I'm done for now, with writing about a certain kind of American history. And maybe there's, in Carney, the alternative American story of the self-made person who rises above their circumstances and makes it despite all these different obstacles.
Is there going to be another heist?
They're different, I call them capers. And so in Harlem Shuffle, there's a straightforward heist. There's a revenge story, another robbery. So there's not a heist per se, but there are different sort of things he has to get off the ground and pull off despite human frailty.
Yes, because he stays a crook, right? Yeah. Well, it's a small step from a heist novel to a heist movie. A French one, even. Rififi, according to many critics, is the ultimate heist movie. What's the storyline in short?
They're gonna rob a jewelry store, 4 guys, and it's it's a prototype for that meticulously planned robbery. So there's a half-hour sequence in the middle, no music, no talking, where they're just doing their business, and that's what we're going to see now.
Yeah, we're not going to see, obviously, the full half hour. We're going to see a couple minutes, because the whole thing is like 28 minutes, and now we're going to see a few minutes.
And there's a thing, in some heist stories where you see the people getting stuff together, and, you see them get an umbrella. Why are they bringing an umbrella to a heist? And that's in this clip.
Rififi. Well, now we know why they brought the umbrella.
Yes. Yeah, there's always that anticipation before the job goes down, where they're casing the place, they're checking out the routes of the security guards, they're buying stuff, you have no idea how it's going to be implemented, and then it comes together in the heist, and it's always sort of a fun moment. I admire the planning of a job like that. I do a lot of outlining as a writer, and so I'm running these different scenarios before I can get to these different chapters or introduce characters, and so I relate to the planning, even if the stakes are very different.
Yeah, but do you agree that it's the ultimate heist movie?
I like so many, so and there are ones that are high tech, like Ocean's 11. There are ones where they get away with it. There are ones where they get caught. I like them. I like them all. So, but this is one of the first ones. In this mold. There's The Asphalt Jungle by John Huston. Stanley Kubrick has The Killing, and the best plans of mice and men, go awry. So they plot and plan, and
is that what makes a good heist story? What makes a good heist story?
I think it's both pulling it off and also
or not
and getting caught. I think I thrill when they get the $8 million and escape, and I also feel that loss and excitement when the plan goes to hell and they're being chased by the police and they're half dead and they have to limp along. So a heist can affirm one's sense of possibility. If I can just pull it off, if I can plot and plan, I can leave my crappy, mundane life behind. And then, of course, things go wrong because that's life.
Yeah.
And if they pull it off, it is an affirmation that you can transcend your existence. You can leave the world you've been born into if you can just get the right scheme together, get the right team together.
I didn't really think of it that way, but come to think of it, yeah. It's also how we, in a way, live our lives, right? Not living from one heist to another, but thinking, maybe in your case, if I only get to finish that book and then everything will be balanced, or if I get to renovate my house and then all will be good, but it never is.
No, yes, when I was younger I thought if I can just finish this novel, and then you finish it and you're the same sad, deluded person you were when you started, and then you do it again and you're still the same person. But without that hope in the apocalypse, without the hope that you can pull off a heist, I wrote a book about poker, that hope that if you get a full house or a royal flush, you can run the table and escape. What's the point of playing? What's the point of writing? What's the point of living?
Yeah, so that's what we derive hope from. Yeah, and we just go on. Yeah. It's funny because now I noticed now in the last, hour, 45 minutes? I don't even know how long we're talking. But you've mentioned
3 hours, yeah.
3 hours. Did it really feel like 3 hours? Holy moly. No, but you've mentioned the poker novel now. Is that the one about poker? Is that your personal favorite book?
No, but it was sort of a start of a new phase in my career, I think. I sort of, even though it's nonfiction and not a novel, I think I was just really in control of the voice and the story. And for me, it's a break. No one really likes it, no, but I like it a lot.
That's why I asked. Yeah. It's like, is it overlooked? Do you feel it's overlooked?
It is, but maybe just people don't like it, which is fine. But for me, it's a start of a new period in my career where I'm just more in control and sort of know what I'm doing. It took about 6 books for me to figure it out. And so The Noble Hustle, which is what it's called, becomes Underground Railroad and Nickel Boys and then Harlem Shuffle. And so for me, it's been just a great time creatively. And so
I wrote down a quote from The Noble Hustle, because you write, and I underlined this right away, I learned a lot of things during my long, bizarre trip about myself and the ways of the world. 1, do not hope for change or the possibility of transcending your everyday existence, because you will fail. 2, if people put their faith in you, you will let them down. And 3, everything is a disaster. You still feel this way, Colson?
Well, there's that push-pull. I think it keeps coming up of optimism and then pessimism. Can I pull off this heist? and maybe I can pull it off sometimes,
Like
and
we
then
discussed,
sometimes
finding the balance, right?
I'll find my, the flaw. And so, definitely in my books, some of them, my characters do pull it off. They find the human refuge. They pull off the heist, and then sometimes they remain determined by their environment, and it's slavery, it's capitalism. So, book to book, I get to allow these different parts of me be expressed, and sometimes it's that optimistic person, and sometimes it's that cynical one.
Did having children change you in that way?
It did. I think I was definitely more removed in terms of like my narrators and my characters, and then my daughter was born 17 years ago, and then I wrote a book called Sag Harbor, which is a personal book. It's about growing up in the 80s.
It's a coming of age story.
And finding your identity. And I think at that moment I knew I had to put myself in more, be less removed. And so it's autobiographical. There's a lot of me in there. And just to grow as an artist, I had to put myself in there more. And
But why did you feel that way?
I had done all I could do with my postmodern hijinks and my icy postmodern remove. You can't just do the same thing over and over again. And I knew that in order to become a better artist and a better person, I had to put myself in there more. And that's the start of, I think, of my characters being a little more full on the page.
Yeah, but it makes you also more vulnerable, right? As a writer.
That's the exciting part, how much of me can I put in there and have it be artistic? How much of me can I put in there and still be comfortable?
Yeah.
What are people going to say? Well, maybe I shouldn't worry about what people will say and just be sort of present. And so, being a parent made me more empathetic and more in the world. And I think if you become more empathetic, it improves your work.
You wanted to show something from The Twilight Zone, the famous American science fiction magazine that started in the 50s. It's a black and white series. What episode did you decide on?
Time Enough at Last, which is one of the ones that most people know. Bemis, I think it's Harry Bemis, is a very bookish guy. He's always trying to read, and then the world is making fun of him, belittling his love for books. Nuclear war, he emerges, everyone is dead.
Yeah, because he works in a bank.
Works in a bank, he's safe in the vault.
Secretly reading his books in the vault.
So he survives the apocalypse, comes out, and he finally has the time to read all these books, and there's no meddling people around nagging him, there's no job. He finally can be alone with his great love. Yeah, he's pulled it off. He's pulled off his heist, and then of course it all goes to hell pretty quickly. So, 1960s, the show was on for a couple years, and then in reruns.
But that's before you were born, right?
Before I was born. Mm-hmm. But when I was in 4th or 5th grade, come home from school, turn on TV. As I said, the parents are not watching.
Yeah.
And there'd be 2 episodes of Twilight Zone back to back, and you never knew what you were going to get. Was it something more science fiction-y? Is someone getting their ironic comeuppance?
Why do you like it so much?
Well, I think, Rod Serling, the narrator who we just heard, was a real humanist. He was in World War II, saw many, many horrors, and the only way he could sort of deal with being back in the world was to write, and using fantasy. So I think I got my training in what fantasy, horror, science fiction can do. You can talk about the world in this indirect way, in a sort of coded way, but it's real. It's real life. It's real people.
Yeah. So it makes the opportunities more elastic. Is that it brightens your horizon that way.
You get to do things you can't do with realism. And I've written books that are strictly realistic and books that have a fantastic element. And each tool, whether it's realism or fantasy, has its strengths and drawbacks. And you pick the right tool for the job.
So what's the strength of the science fiction genre?
Well, you can move things around and get and find a new order. So Underground Railroad, the metaphor for this social network that helps slaves escape becomes a literal train in my book, and each stop on the train is a different alternative America. If I'd stuck with a traditional realistic slave story, I couldn't have this play. I couldn't contrast different periods in American history in a way that makes that book very vital. And then the book after that, Nickel Boys, is straightforward realism. It's about a reform school where boys are abused, and there's no need for a fantastic armature. Sticking close to the story, sticking close to my two main characters is the best sort of approach.
Yeah.
So whenever I start something, I'm always thinking, what's the best tool? Is it a narrator that's very loquacious and talks in 5-clause pile-up sentences? Is it a narrator who's very terse? In the same way that Rod Serling, the narrator of The Twilight Zone, is a sort of ringmaster, commenting on the action from a reserve. I like a kind of complicated narrator who can have that same sort of quality. So before I start, I'm outlining the story, outlining my heist, but also figuring out who the narrator is.
Yeah, and you watched like you said, you watched The Twilight Zone as a kid. I mean, the fantasy element of it made you want to invent these types of worlds as well?
See, you think making up weird stories, whether it was something like The Twilight Zone or comic books like X-Men, Spider-Man.
Marvel
Comics. My mother would buy the annual Stephen King. It would make the rounds of the house, eventually come to me and my brother's room.
Yeah.
So it seemed like writing stories about robots and vampires and werewolves would be a good way to make a living. You just make up stuff all day.
Yeah.
And in terms
amazing.
of jobs, it seemed like a nice way to make some money.
But the shows you watched and the comics you read showed worlds, I think, back then mostly filled with white people, right? White actors, white storylines, white whatever. Were you aware of that as a child? Because you were aware of the fact, the one black guy being torn apart by the zombies.
Sure. And seeing yourself on screen, was very important. In the X-Men, part of the X-Men narrative is that they're outsiders, they're hated by society, but they found a family. And so whether you're black, you're queer, you're just a social misfit, you're a nerd, you can find your clan in the X-Men. And I think a lot of people, found themselves in comic books because, finding the value in nerddom was sort of rare in pop culture. So so definitely comics provided a way to see myself. Peter Parker.
Even though there were no black superheroes back then.
There are a few. They're kind of corny.
Not that many. I mean, there are a lot now, but.
Yeah, I mean, Black Panther was there, but in the '70s, he was very corny. He was like super, noble in this way that was very sort of off-putting.
Says so much about you that you think noble is off-putting. Damn.
A little too good to be true. I like, my main characters to be a little.
No, I'm also asking this because your love of Marvel is mentioned in a lot of interviews, so people know about it. I knew about it. Has Walt Disney Studios contacted you yet to write like a new Marvel superhero?
I've been asked a few times
Really?
to do some films, like if I'm interested in film or writing comics. But at this point, I have like 3 or 4 books I have to get through before I can do something different.
Sorry, I don't have the time.
No, when I was younger, it would have been a dream. And a lot of people who are my age who write literary fiction did love Marvel. They either wanted to write the X-Men or draw the X-Men or be in the X-Men. It's a gateway drug, fantasy literature. Not just for me, but a lot of my peers, whether it's Jonathan Lethem or Junot Diaz or Michael Chabon, which is why a lot of those people, sometimes have that fantastic or geeky element.
We've mentioned the Underground Railroad a couple of times, and there's an obvious sci-fi, science fiction, magic realism element in the novel. And you play on a part of American history, right, referred as the Underground Railroad. When did you first learn of the Underground Railroad?
3rd or 4th grade, just in passing. Slavery is not taught very thoroughly in school. I think more so now but definitely when I was a kid. So the one day we mentioned slavery, they mention the Underground Railroad.
It's Monday, let's
yeah.
discuss it, yeah.
And then you hear those words, and they're so vivid, you think it's a literal train, and it's really just people helping each other stop to stop.
Yeah.
You escape from the plantation, you're running north to safety. Maybe an abolitionist, hides you in their wagon for 100 miles, hands you off to somebody else. You hide in their house for a week until the coast is clear. Then you go on your next leg. So it's, there's no, we have 7 miles of track in New York City, and we can barely keep that going. So thousands of miles of track beneath America. It's very difficult.
Yeah.
But is it it's a social network.
Is it a common misconception amongst young American kids that they thinking it's an actual railroad, or was it just in your head?
No, it's very common, and hopefully your teacher explains how it actually works. But I've met people who are in their 60s who've gone their whole lives thinking it's a literal train.
Yeah.
So it goes to show you how vivid that idea is.
I read that even Oprah Winfrey was like Googling once reading your book, like, wait, did I? Yeah. Is this true?
But it just shows how crappy our educational system is.
Yeah. In your book, you make it into a little underground railroad that delivers the main character, Cora, to different states in the U.S., but also different fictional realities, different...
Yeah, it's like Gulliver's Travels would be a good analog.
Oh, yeah.
But also like the Odyssey, she goes from state to state, and she has to solve a sort of allegorical problem of, in the Odyssey, it's the Cyclops, it's the Sirens. In this book, it's a white supremacist state, a black utopia.
You add fantastic elements to a serious story. I mean, a thoroughly researched historical narrative about slavery. Did you have any doubts whether you would get away with that?
I'm always, that's the challenge. Is this gonna make sense? And I remember getting to page 110, I was like, I gotta show my wife. Does this make any sense, or am I just crazy? And, so usually I'll have a weird premise for a story.
Luckily, your wife is in the business, right? She's
a literary agent.
Yeah.
What
did she say?
She said, it's pretty good. And the way she sort of said it, I knew I'd sort of hit upon something that was gonna be different than my other books.
But were you worried about the reactions to it? Did that...
Not reactions, no. I remember in Germany, it came out, and there's some German critics who were like, the story of slavery is so terrible. Why do you need a fantastic element? And I was like, thanks, white guy, for telling me, someone who's descended from slaves, how to tell the story of slavery. Like, I'm not actually...
Yeah, I've once heard, like, you should not take criticism seriously from people that you would not go to take advice from.
Sure, I'm gonna start using that. And if you go to Amazon, there'll be like 1 star, like, there was no literal train beneath the earth. The story's ridiculous. Yeah. And it's like, you're catching on. And I'm sure that person is like, Jurassic Park, 1 star. There's no such thing as dinosaurs. This is preposterous. So, but as with any kind of premise, if you pull it off, you pull it off. And if you don't. And for most people, it works. And so I feel...
You definitely pulled it off. The book, The Underground Railroad, has been made into a TV series, and you would like to show a scene from that series.
Indeedy doodly.
It's a big risk, right, having your story put on screen. But you said you were pleased with the end result. At what point did you know your book was in good hands with the director, Barry Jenkins?
Well, I had to, give him permission to do it. And so his big movie up till then was Moonlight, and it had not come out yet. It was about to go into festivals, and so I didn't know his work. So they sent me a link on my computer. I watched it on my little computer like a millennial. And it was really good, so we talked. And I never interviewed a filmmaker before. So I remember asking him dumb questions, and my last question was like, are there any slave movies that inspired you? And he was like, slave movies? I was thinking more, Paul Thomas Anderson's There Will Be Blood and The Master. And I was like, okay, we're done here. And each time he
But you said interview, you actually had like a job interview with him.
Yes. Like, do I trust this guy?
Yeah.
And at the end, I had complete trust. I think most adaptations are bad. And so if you're going to give it over to somebody, you have to think, my book is the book, and then the TV show, the film is something separate. No matter how bad they screw it up, my book exists. In this case, I had no doubts that he would pull it off, and it exceeded my sort of wildest dreams.
Wow.
It was more than I deserve, is what my first takeaway.
Really?
Yes.
Where are we?
We're towards the end, and so there are things that work in the book that don't work on the screen. And so Barry Jenkins, writer-director, has to figure out how to adapt the novel for the screen. So we're about to see something that's not in the book.
Yeah.
And it's towards the end, and Cora, our main character, has to decide what her next stop is. Is she going to get on the train again? Is she going to stay where she is? Has she found a safe harbor? She's never known safety. So she's in a psychologically fraught place and in an invented scene that Barry made for the movie.
Let's have a look. The Underground Railroad. Whew.
Yeah, I felt that a lot. Watching it, not necessarily because of something terrible was happening, but just like this, I can't believe he pulled it off. Like, just, he got these beautiful actors, the set design, the composer, and they worked on this adaptation for 3 years and made this incredible work of art. I just feel really, fortunate. And whenever I see it now, I just feel completely humbled and very, very lucky.
Proud, maybe?
Well, I think there's that part just now. There's a voiceover in that scene talking about timetables, and that's a monologue is taken from my first book, The Intuitionist. It's about elevator inspectors. And one day I got a call from Barry saying, can I take this part from The Intuitionist? And it's like they're in the same universe, The Intuitionist and Underground Railroad. And I think about the conditions of writing that first novel. No one really cared about my work and was battling out on the page every day. And I remember when I hear it, writing that monologue in my apartment in Brooklyn, 25 years ago, not knowing if this book would get published. But knowing if I did it, I'd be a better writer for having done it and maybe 3 or 4 books down. So I think about starting out and struggling and writing that monologue, and then suddenly, 25 years later,
you have your own TV series.
Yeah, so it's just sort of so miraculous and strange.
So the director also brought another dimension of you into this work.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally different characters, totally different situation, but he found the link.
Yeah.
And
the quote is, "The train is leaving, the train is always leaving, and you have not found your words." But what did you mean when you wrote that?
Part of it's about writing. Part of it is about misconnections. And definitely Cora and Caesar, the 2 people there, have started off in their journey, and they've taken different routes. So it's about the accidents of life, and then also finding yourself. If you maybe wait a little while, the right train will come, and that's Cora, and then also us as human beings and as artists.
It applied to you.
Yeah, I think definitely.
Yeah, and like you said, anyone who has read the book will be puzzled because this does not happen in the book, right? The whole scene where she meets the ghost of Caesar, or what is?
I would say Ghost of Caesar, and there are different parts where he's added scenes or fleshed out.
But what is this scene about for you?
It is about her wondering what's next. Is she getting on the next train? Is she actually ready? The conductor is like, oh, I'm not sure if you know what's going on here. You haven't really necessarily left the plantation.
And I read the book, and the characters are close to me in a sense. I teared up watching this scene for the first time. But how about you?
Plenty of times. And again, not even when it's necessarily an emotional part, just like at the wonder that he pulled off this heist. He got his crew together, and particularly there are scenes where he added a character or moved things around, fleshed out a backstory, and I became a viewer. I became someone who didn't know, no spoilers. I don't know what's going to happen with this character he added, and it's my own book. And so it brings new life to this thing that I lived with for so long. And the same way I'm doing a sequel to Harlem Shuffle, finding a different acquaintance with something I've done, I get to find a different relationship to Cora through the adaptation. Like when I write, I don't see characters' faces. I see the stuff they do. I know who they are, but I never visualize people's faces. And
so you saw her face for the first time in the series?
And it was her. And he was Caesar. And all their choices were so perfect that I get to come to it in a new sort of way. Or there's this recognition, which is impossible, where my own work is being revealed to me through someone else's.
I'm going to ask the question again, because are you proud of yourself? It sounds like, are you proud of yourself? But really, are you?
I feel glad that it's worked out. And
you don't allow yourself to be proud?
Oh, it's there. And it's also knowing that tomorrow I'm back to work and I got to figure out, how does Corny get out of this jam that I put him in? And that's difficult but also wonderful, because Corny's a character I couldn't have done 10 years ago or 15 years ago. I couldn't have written Underground Railroad when I first had the idea in the year 2000. I thought I was too immature. I don't think I was a good enough writer. And so I waited till I was ready. And, the same way it scared me to write about slavery or write a book that had this crazy structure, the scary thing is the things you should be doing. It makes you alive, no matter what your job is or what kind of person you are. So I think proportion is good. I think being happy that it works out doesn't mean you get to coast next time. And the best thing is when, people buy your book, and then I don't have to have a day job. I can just work on Nickel Boys or Harlem Shuffle full time and not have that sort of thing.
Do it. And the reinventing yourself, I mean, we talked a lot about that. It keeps you from being bored. It keeps you challenged, which is clearly very important to you. Is there, in like 5 or 10 years, is there going to be something else besides books? I mean, another medium even?
Well, I think working on a TV show. There's a writer's room for the people. I'm not sure. I'm sort of a loner. I'm not sure if I could deal.
Yeah, you have to go to an office, work with other people.
Yeah, wear clothes and take a shower. But I think, adapting something like, I admire the adaptations of The Arrival and Children of Men, like maybe adapting someone else's story and figuring out how to get something that's sort of abstract and reel it in.
So you might write the adaptation for a science fiction movie, or
yeah, but I have like 3 books to do before I can do that. So so it might be 10 years from now. Okay. But it'd be nice. I think it'd be good to mix it up, and I'm sort of ready for that. I just got to write these books first. So.
You got to write these books first. Well, I won't take up any more of your time then.
Yes.
Chop chop. I'm glad you found your words today, and thank you for being yourself. And thanks, obviously, for your wonderful books.
Thanks for having me here.